Today I added a bunch of new animals from real life, ranging from cute and passive ones to those that are totally dangerous and deadly. I decided to build a zoo for them with separate enclosures for each animal. I took on Lunchino's challenge, in which he made a similar video, but I added some different animals, and I also want to build a much bigger zoo than his, and I started all of this in a world where I collected every block in Minecraft. And welcome back. First, I took the most essential items and set out to find the perfect spot. And here I think will be just perfect. First, I leveled the entire area to get a flat terrain, which took me 2 hours. Next, since I already had the blueprint for my zoo ready, I set up a bunch of furnaces to smelt cobblestone into stone to make stone bricks, which I use for building the framework of our zoo. However, for our zoo, we will need a lot of stone bricks, slabs, and glass. So I set out to gather a bunch of stone first, which I brought back to our base to store, and then I had to mine even more. Stone and then a bit of sand. When I had all the materials ready, I started by laying out the walls of our entire zoo so that they would be huge. And we've got it, alright, the walls are finished. Next, I added the outline of our enclosures, which we will decorate in the future so that they perfectly match the habitats of real-life animals. Alright, this looks awesome. And it looks really cool, and honestly it's impressive. Then we'll have to fill all these enclosures, so now we're off to get our first mob, which is the elephant. Just like I said, that's what I did. I headed out to the savannah, and after running around for a bit, I spotted an elephant. And look how huge it is. And ooh, it's so tiny. Hey, wow, look how cute it looks, check it out. Look at those ears. Alright, I'm definitely taking this little one with me. And we'll definitely take a regular elephant too. And now we have to lead them to our enclosures, so that's going to take me a bit. Next, I led them to our zoo, put them in the enclosure, and tied them to the fence. However, I forgot to bring the blocks needed for the enclosure, so I went back to the savanna biome, where I collected acacia wood, sand, and clay. Next, using wood and glass, I added the walls to our enclosure, and then I started decorating the inside so that there would be tilled soil, sand, and water. And I added clay on which I placed string so that it couldn't grow any higher. Later, I used bone meal in the water to make it look nicer and planted a tree. This is how the finished enclosure for our elephants looked, but the next ones will be even stronger and nicer. I would like to ask you to boost this video by swiping the comment right and clicking boost. You can also leave a like, I really appreciate it. However, now I had to get as many name tags as possible so that in the future I could name every animal. So I ran to the nearby village where I was constantly trading with villagers to get emeralds, which I then exchanged for name tags. Altogether, I managed to get 36 of them. Then, I used the remaining experience levels to enchant 3 shovels because I would need them later to gather a lot of sand. On top of that, I combined 2 of them and added mending to my elytra. I put a name tag into the anvil and typed in the name I wanted to give my elephant. Then I went to the elephants and named one of them Stash. I decided to head to the ice biome to find penguins, but before that, oh, I just broke. What's going on? The ice keeps breaking under me. I'm too heavy. But after a moment, I managed to find them. I see them, there are penguins, and there are 3, 4 penguins. And look at those animations, what's going on? It's hunting for fish, it just ate it easily. Fish, it looks so good. Whoa, it's holding it in its mouth. Hey, okay, that's super cute the way it looks. I decided to put one of them on a lead, then another, and then I led them to the base. Eventually, I got there and released them so I could quickly go back to make fences, and then I attached them to it. Next, I decided to enclose them because I wanted to have exactly 4 penguins, just like in the cartoon penguins of Madagascar, so I had to go back to the snowy biome. There, I found 2 penguins, which I attached, and then went to collect blocks for our enclosure. Along the way, I found an igloo where I took a golden apple and a potion of weakness. Then I went back to our penguins and led them to my base, and finally, I walled them in. Now I could focus on building a cage for our penguins. Of course, I first made the outline and then I worked on the inside. I had to dig a big hole, put ice at the bottom, and replace the walls with stone. Next, I built a secret base, just like in the cartoon penguins of Madagascar, and then I added an iron trapdoor and decided to decorate the whole base to make it functional. And you can just, as you see, jump down here and we have the base. The secret base of the penguins of Madagascar. However, at the very end, I had to pour water everywhere here so our penguins could swim around. And of course, I didn't forget to add some greenery. Next, I named all the name tags after characters from the cartoon and went to add them to our penguins, whom I then led to their new home. Since I was running out of food, I went to the village where I gathered hay bales, which will also come in handy in the future. But now I wanted to find red pandas, so after a while I discovered a bamboo forest. And then after a moment inside it, there are red ones somewhere around here. Hey, yes, Jesus, look how sweetly she's lying there. I think she's sleeping right now, but just look at how cute that is. And they're all sleeping. There are actually 3 pandas here right now. Next, I tried to take them with me, but first, of course, I gathered a bunch of different blocks that I would need for our new enclosure. and then one of the pandas woke up. And again, I collected the rest of the blocks until finally I could start leading them to my zoo. Next, I tied them to the fence and started building my new enclosure, and I did it. First, I outlined the shape and then I added a bunch of different blocks to decorate the interior. Then I took the Imta and I decided to give her a name. And actually, we can even name the red panda Evron, because Evron really reminds me of a red panda, so this will be our Evron. Later, I went to her and named one of them Evron. Unfortunately, getting them to stand up was quite a challenge. Hello? Boy. But finally I came up with the idea to put them on a lead and fly up, which woke them up, and I was finally able to take them to their new home. Man, just look at my animation, how amazing it looks. So welcome to the new zoo, and this is your enclosure. Next I walled up the passage, and I had to fly to the desert to collect a lot of sand, which will be useful in the future to make glass for our enclosures. Later I took some dead bushes and red sand, because now I wanted to build an enclosure for snakes. So I looked around the mesa, found two, and of course once again, I brought them to our zoo. Next, I started building an enclosure for them, but I didn't forget about the ceiling so they wouldn't accidentally climb out, and they didn't run away from me. Next, I replaced the entire floor with regular and red sand and made them a little cave. Then I added dead bushes and a small pond with water, and finally green concrete to imitate cacti so our snakes wouldn't hurt themselves on real ones. When the cage was ready, I went to get the name tag, which I named Mikash, and then I came back for our snakes and led them into the cage. And we'll name you Makash, because you're looking at me, so it looks really cool, and I'll just close you in here. And that's how we caught another real-life animal in Minecraft. The next animal I wanted in our zoo was alligators, which are some of the more dangerous ones. So I set out for the swamps, and after a bit of running around, I managed to find them. At first, they were neutral toward me, until I accidentally hit one. I didn't hit it hard, but it wasn't strong anyway. I gathered various blocks for the enclosure, then put two alligators on a lead and led them to the zoo. But what is he doing? What's going on? What's going on? Hey, okay, I didn't expect that. In the water it was much faster and stronger, but I finally managed to bring it to the zoo and tie it to the fence. Next, I prepared the cage from the outside again, and then I moved on to decorating the inside. First, I replaced the dirt with mud, then I added a pond for our alligators. After that, I placed 2 trees for atmosphere and built a couple of small hills out of mud, and I put down a lot of carpet to give it a better vibe. After building the cage, I went to get Najamt and added a name. Alligator. Let's call him Alligator. Then I gave a name to one of them and led them to their new home. But now we have new animals, we have new alligators, and it looks really cool. Next, I decided to replace the entire floor in our zoo because I didn't like the dirt, so I set out to a bamboo biome to collect a bunch of bamboo, which I brought back to the base and started replacing it slowly. I swapped the dirt for bamboo planks to make it look nicer, and the result turned out really great. After building the floor, I decided to fly to a nearby village to buy a few mending books and applied them to my tools. I killed mobs to gain experience levels and finished adding the enchantments to my gear. I also noticed snails near my base, and I wanted them as the next mob for my enclosure, so I led them to a hole in front of my base. Then I flew to the village to collect beets, which I took to my zoo to get even more snails by using bone meal. And then I went to my snails, and now we can officially breed our little snails. What's most interesting is that you can recolor their shells with any dye in Minecraft, so it's time to collect all the dyes. I went to my previous base, where I had collected all the blocks in Minecraft and took them from the chest. Then I returned to my zoo, where I saw that the snails had already laid eggs, and all I had left to do was wait. In the meantime, while the snails were hatching from their eggs, I decided to build them a new enclosure. First, I lined the walls of their enclosure. Then I decorated the inside, using a variety of, really, a lot of different blocks to give it a better vibe. Next, I went back to my little snails. Wow, look at all these snails, so many of them have spawned. Alright, let's breed some more snails. Now, all I had left to do was wait for the snails to hatch from their eggs. In the meantime, I made 15 buckets and went back to collect them all, which was a really cool thing to do. Then I went to our enclosure, which I had placed on the ground, and started coloring them with all the dyes available in Minecraft. However, after a while, I noticed that they could climb up the walls and end up dying from falling. So I gathered them all into a bucket and then went back to the other snails to color them in the shades that, unfortunately, had already died. Next, I quickly added a glass ceiling, it grew, I placed them in a cage, and I named one of them Bob, just like in one of the games from my childhood. After sorting out the snails, I went to the nearby forest, where I took some boars and attached them to the fence. Then I started building walls and decorating the entire interior, which looked really cool and gave off a forest vibe. Next, I led them to their new enclosure and decided to name one of them Boris. Then I replaced the sand near my base with glass because I wanted to build a huge aquarium there. Unfortunately, I had to move all the chests and other items so they would be next to the enclosures. After doing that, I set out to find a coral reef where there were lots of little octopuses. I collected them in buckets, then returned to my base to build the entire huge glass aquarium. After that, I had some fun adding water, and then I placed glass over the enclosure. Next, I added lots of corals to make it look nice, and the best part? After a while, I discovered this. That is, they let me breathe underwater. Can I actually build this normally now? Yo, I didn't know about this. At the very end, I used a bunch of bone meal. When the aquarium was ready, I placed all the little octopuses inside, and I decided to name one of them Cassia. I decided that the next animal to add to my zoo would be a bear, so I went back to the spruce forest where I had found bears before. But after a moment... Whoa, what is he like? Fast. Did his eyes? Did they turn red? The bear was really hostile towards me, but that was because there was a cub nearby. In the end, I put them on a lead and took them to their new home. Later, I went back to that forest to gather the necessary blocks, and then I started building a cage for my bears. Inside, I added a ton of decorations that really gave the place some character. It has a really cool vibe. In my opinion, this is the best cage visually. There are tons of details and it looks really beautiful. So what now? We can officially go get our bears. Soon after, I went to sleep and named Nain at the villagers, and then I led the bears to their new home. Finally, I gave one of them a name. But aside from that, and on top of that, we can give them sweet berries and breed them this way, and as a result we'll get... Yeah, they got mad at me right then. No way, I can't believe it, because I stood next to the baby bear. But in the end, I managed to escape from that cage, close it, and the little bear looked absolutely adorable. Next, I set out for the savannah, where I found some lizards. There it is, we've got lizards! Ooh, I managed to tame it on the first try, and what's the best part? By using spider eyes, we can tame it, and now it's our friend, so... Let him sit down and just look at how good he looks. However, and after a while I found a second lizard, which I also managed to tame after a bit of running around. Next, I transported them to my base, tied them up, and started building another enclosure for them, which I also tried to decorate as nicely as possible inside. When the enclosure was ready, I went back to my lizards and led them to the anvil, where I put in a name tag which I named Lizard, and then used it on the lizard. And what's best, if we hit the lizard a few times, its tail will fall off, which we can then kill, and so that our lizard isn't left without a tail, we can use spider eyes to repair it. The best part is, we can do this over and over again, and it's a really cool thing related to real lizards, that their tails grow back. After this fun, I took them to the cage which keeps me in place. Next, I wanted to get some squirrels, but before that I had to collect some acorns, and when I saw the squirrels, I ran up to them and started to tame them using those very acorns. Then I put 2 of them on a leash and attached them to the fence so that I could build the walls for the new cage, and then work on decorating the interior, which turned out perfectly. For their new home. When the cage was ready, I went to the anvil and named the name tags after characters from the cartoon Alvin and the Chipmunks because it's my favorite cartoon. Then I went back for my chipmunks, which I quickly named Alvin and Theodore, and then I took them to their new home. After such small animals like chipmunks, it was time for something huge. The giraffes, which I found on the savannah, and when I saw them, I immediately fed them apples. And from what I know, we can probably tame them with apples, so... Because I think I have this one tamed, and now I'll try with this one as well. And now, from what I can tell, we can get on them, and yes, we can actually ride them. This is so awesome, just look at how it looks. This feature was super cool, and what's best, I didn't have to use leads, because the giraffes followed me when I held an apple in my hand. After a while, I managed to lead them to the zoo, and then I went to build a cage for them that kept the savannah vibe so they would feel as comfortable as possible there. Next, I had a bit of a struggle getting them inside because of their size, but in the end I managed to do it. Another really cool feature was that I could breed them using hay bales. And how cute are they? They were honestly super adorable, and I decided to name them Jakush. Next, I went back to the savannah, where I found hippos that had an awesome animation for opening and closing their mouths. But in the end, I put them on a lead and took them to my zoo. Then I built walls for them, and later I destroyed the first layer, replaced it with water, and then dug it out. The next one's 3 layers, after which I built a mini island for them where they can rest, and I also made it look nice. I decorated it. Then I went back for my hippos to lead them to the enclosure, but I didn't realize that they can't swim in Minecraft, so I just left them there and named one of them Moto. However, in our zoo we also can't forget about animals that can fly, so I went to the desert where I found vultures, which I managed to lure with rotten zombie meat. After that, all I had left to do was transport them and then tie them to a fence post. However, as I was running with another cage, I saw this. What's going on? The squirrel ran away. Oh no, I didn't know they could climb. That way only Theodore was left. And I lost Alvin, who was very important to me because Alvin and the Chipmunks is my favorite cartoon, so I would appreciate some kind words for Alvin in the comments. When Theodore returned to the cage, I built a glass ceiling for him so that at least he would stay in the cage and not run away. Once I had built the entire ceiling, I could start working on another new cage for Senpu, so first I built the walls again, and then I worked on making the interior comfortable. It had a desert theme. Next, I went back for Sempi to bring them to the cage, and then I went to get name. The one I named, so let's maybe call him Sempi? I came up with a kind of funny name. By the way, when I wanted to go back to them, I quickly went to the hippos to add a bit more greenery, which I had forgotten earlier, and then I went to name our vulture. Next, I went to the jungle, where after running around for a bit, I found a spider, specifically a jumping spider. What a cutie! Plus, jumping spiders can jump really high, just like in real life, and they are the cutest spiders. At that point, I didn't take her with me to my base and instead started preparing a room for her, beginning with the walls and ceilings so that the spiders didn't escape, and then I destroyed all the stone to replace it with dirt and podzol. I also added 2 trees and a secret cave for our spiders so they would have their own little home. At the very end, I added a bunch of various decorations that really enhanced the look of the place. And then I went back to our spiders, named one of them Jumper, and carefully led them to their new enclosure. On top of that, when I left my base, I noticed some ducks, which I also brought in front of my zoo. This time, I built the walls out of regular wood, and I really put effort into the appearance here. Because there was a mix of everything here so they would feel as comfortable as possible, I decided to name the duck Scrooge McFudge and took them to their new home. Next, I set out for the savannah where I found some rhinoceroses. Alright, and let's check if these rhinos attack, so I'll try to hit one. And are they aggressive towards me? No, I think they're friendly, right? Whoa, what's going on? Okay, I wasn't expecting that. What's going on? Now he keeps charging at me like that. The rhinoceros was knocking me back really hard, but after charging at me for a while, he calmed down, so I put 2 of them on a lead and took them to my zoo. At the very beginning, I started preparing the enclosure for them using sand and dirt, and then I built the walls of our cage, After that, I added water and planted aquatic plants, and finally I added some visual elements like lily pads, dead bushes, 3 acacia trees, and I turned all the dirt into a savanna theme and the enclosure was done. It was ready. Name tag. I named him Conrad and went over to them. So you will be Conrad. Of course, I led them to their new enclosure and neatly locked them in. When I left my zoo, I noticed an otter and then after a moment a second one. So I decided to bring them to my zoo and tag them as well. Next, I built the sturdy walls of our enclosure out of birch and glass and then carefully poured water inside. Then I dug out 2 more layers and used bone meal there so that lush plants would grow. And I added green lily pads in random places and finally built floating logs to give the whole place an even better atmosphere. And that is exactly how our finished enclosure for our otter looks now. Next, I went to our otters and named one of them Nicola, and then of course I brought her to the enclosure so she would feel at home here. After building this enclosure, I headed to the savannah where I found zebras. And look how quickly she's running away from me. What's going on? I didn't expect that. However, I managed to catch up to them and after a moment tame them, so everything turned out fine. You can put a saddle on her, but unfortunately I didn't have one with me. After taming her, I went to the second zebra, which I also tamed. Once they were both tamed, I put them on a lead. And I took them to my base. As always, I built walls. Then, inside I wanted to build them an enclosure where I added hay bales and then I decorated the whole interior, which looked really nice. Then I went back to our zebras and went to get a saddle so I could put it on them later. And now I want to see how it looks for you. Well, that's not a saddle, but it's nice. The saddle looked super elegant, and on top of that, our zebra was really huge, fast. And it reminded me of the regular boring horses in Minecraft. Finally, using the saddle, I led them to the pen and decided to name one of them Franek, leaving the saddle on it to make it look prestigious. Running around my world after a while I saw... Yes, there are officially turtles, look at this, they even have an animation where they hide themselves. When I approached them, look how funny it looks. Then I put them on a lead and brought them to my zoo. I built the turtle enclosure from the outside using sandstone and glass, and as for the interior, I made a huge room with water. And finally, I built a little mini island for them, so they could take a rest on it. I quickly went back for our turtles to name one of them Kuba, and I led them to their new home. Next, I set out to find Fredky, which I also managed to find. There they are, I see them. Oh wow, they're sleeping, what's going on? 4 of them showed up here and look how they're sleeping so nicely and how cute they are. Of course, as always, I put 2 of them on a lead and thanks to the water I managed to wake them up. But they have a running animation. That was just too cute, and I brought them over to my zoo. I decided to build their enclosure out of stone bricks and glass, with dirt covering the entire floor. I broke it down and replaced it with stone. Next, I prepared a watering hole for them and added a small hill where I placed some random ores to give it more atmosphere. I added a few more figurines, and at the very end, I scattered random ores everywhere to make it look. The enclosure had more vibrant colors. When it was ready, I went to get our ferrets and I named one of them Casper. Then I moved them into the enclosure and they seemed to like their new home. Once finished there, I headed to the spruce forest and eventually found some moose. Whoa, they're running away from me so fast. What's going on? Alright, come on, please. This is how fast he runs away. I finally managed to catch up with him, which was seriously incredibly difficult, and then after a while I started getting closer to the second moose so as not to spook him, which worked brilliantly because I took it easy and took him on the line. I took them with me and drank them to roach. Later, using pink wood, I built them walls. And then I worked on the center where I replaced the stone with dirt and made a mini watering hole, and then I planted 2 trees. They connected together so nicely, honestly, and I really like it, so I'm going to leave it like that. At the very end, I laid down hay bales and placed forest flowers, which gave it a nice vibe. Then I went to name the name tag so I could immediately use it on the moose. Next, I led them into the enclosure and left them there, and while I was at it, I destroyed the leaves sticking out beyond the wall. I wanted to build the next enclosure in a non-standard way because I wanted to have fireflies, birds, and butterflies in it. So first I had to build the walls so I could later divide our enclosure into 3 sections. On one of them, I planted a tree, added water, and used bone meal so that it would be an enclosure for our birds. Next, I wanted to build a meadow for our butterflies. First, I added a tree, and then I decided to plant a bunch of different flowers here to make it more vibrant in color. For the last part of this enclosure, I only had the fireflies left, for which I built a swamp-themed enclosure. At the very end, all that was left was to lay glass all the way to the top so that our animals wouldn't mix with each other and it would be their own territory. While I was at it, I noticed that 2 butterflies had appeared among our snails, so I put them on a lead. And I took them to their new home. And what's even better, by using flowers, I was able to breed them so that a caterpillar would appear, which will turn into a butterfly in the future, and I named it Henyo. Then I noticed another butterfly, so I took it to the cage, and so the first of 3 parts was officially finished. Next, I flew around for a bit, and I noticed some birds, which of course I put on a lead. Also, when I was leading them, I noticed that when they sang, musical notes appeared above them. I quickly went to sleep with them and finally locked them in their new home. While searching for more birds, I noticed a squirrel, and when I flew up to it... What's this? That's Alvin. That's how I found Alvin, who had previously escaped from our zoo. So I took him to the cage where Theodore was. And I hope you'll never escape from here again because man, you have no idea how much we missed you here. I left him there, and then when I was looking for more birds, I saw this. Yo, how many butterflies is that? What's going on? What's this? How many butterflies? But alright, we've already got the butterflies. How many are there? Butterflies because they're breeding from this. There were tons of butterflies here, but after a moment I found a similar cluster. I took 2 of them. Of course, I brought them to the new cage, and so 2 out of 3 parts of our cage were already done. But for the fireflies, I had to go to the swamps, which by the way were super small. However, I took 1 dragonfly and 1 firefly with me, but when I wanted to bring them to the cage, suddenly my firefly died. It was because the night had ended, and unfortunately they can't survive the day. For now though, I only put the dragonfly in the cage, and when night came I noticed that fireflies can spawn everywhere. They can spawn everywhere, so I tried to get as many of them into the sea. Then I went to get a name tag, which I named Svietlush, and used it on one of the fireflies. And then, of course, I led them to their new home. This is how the finished cage looked, and I could move on to the second to last animal, which was the crab. I had to go to the beach to get it. There was 1 crab on the beach, but I wanted to take 2 with me so that it wouldn't be lonely. Along the way, I started collecting a bunch of seashells because I would use them for the cage. When I returned to my crab, I saw that a second one had spawned, but I discovered 1 small problem. So now, I'll just take you both with me. Wait, can I really not put them on a leash? Unfortunately, that wasn't possible, so I checked if the boat would work on them, and luckily it did. However, and after a moment, the second crab got into it as well, and I couldn't quite break the boat, but eventually I managed, and after realizing they were aggressive when I hit them, I decided to transport them on foot. This was much easier because I finally reached the zoo and placed the boat, which they got into. I decided to name one of them Pan Crab, just like from the Punch Bowl cartoon. Next, I went to prepare a cage for them, so I did it again. First the walls, then I replaced the entire ground with sand and added water, and then I used bone meal. Next I added sugarcane and planted 3 palm trees which connected together nicely. Finally, I added some visual elements like dead bushes and shells, and it immediately looked much better. Later, I went back to our crabs, but I couldn't break the boat, so I went to get a lighter, which I used on the boat. One of the crabs started to burn, but fortunately it didn't die. Mr. Crab didn't get burned, so now we lead them to the cage, but then, what's going on? The shell cracked. I didn't expect that, but I hit the second crab, so at least I could get it to the cage. I managed to do that, and then I decided to go back for the other one, the crab. But unfortunately, I couldn't put it on the leash, so I used the boat, which worked this time. I gently moved forward with it and built around it so it would go up, and then I put it in the boat and sailed with it to the new cage. Alright, and there you are. And now we officially have two crabs. One is without a shell and is super fast, and the other is just normal, with a shell, and its name is Pan Crab, so I officially have two crabs here now. After the crabs, it was officially time for the next and the last mob, which is the lion. However, before setting out, I built a huge cage to showcase his power as the king of animals. I built the cage walls out of concrete and glass, and the cage was seriously huge. Next, I had to replace all the netherrack blocks everywhere, and then I used a bunch of shovels to turn that grass into something reminiscent of the savannah. Then I added sand and a watering hole so our lions would have some contact. After that, I planted 4 acacia trees and added a few fallen trees. Next, I placed a couple of pseudo-dried trees and decorated the area even more and even more. At the very end, I wanted to build the big rock from the Lion King cartoon, which looked really impressive. As the final touch, I added a few tweaks and our enclosure was officially ready. However, before setting off, I named him Simba and I was ready to fly to the savannah. I see lions. Okay, how many lions are there? What's going on? And there's one male, that's why there's one little one, and here's his mom, so just look at how awesome this looks. I also wanted to check how aggressive they are. What's going on? Okay, did it just attack me? Okay, it hits hard, it hits a lot. I didn't expect that, its eyes are completely red. I also checked if the female was aggressive and she attacked me too. They were seriously mad at me, so I quickly flew off to find some other lions, which I found after a while and took with me to the zoo. I put them in the cage, and this is how the whole zoo looks. A zoo that took me over 30 hours just to build.